Welcome to Om on the Range, where we share the practice of meditation, the wisdom of Western Buddhism, and the refuge of our community. Whether you are new to meditation or a longtime practitioner, committed or curious, this offering is here to share solutions, stories, and support. Happiness and better health are available to everyone. It just takes practice. This is Om on the Range. Hello, I'm your host. My name is Whit. Thank you for joining us today. Our co-host this week is Lulu, who's a member of the Temple Buddhist Center, Sangha, here in Kansas City. Some of the other things you do when not being a member of the Sangha: you're a traveler, a dog lover, a practitioner. So Lulu, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Very excited to be here today.
We'll see if you feel the same way in 30 minutes. So let's start off by, if you would, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born, anything you want to share.
So I was born in a small country right near Greece in southeastern Europe called Macedonia. From a very young age, I had a dream to move to the United States. And when I was in high school, I had an opportunity to sign up with an exchange student program. And so I was able to move to Kansas City because the way that the program worked is my host family chose me. I came to the U.S. in 2003 in my last year of high school, and I've been in Kansas City ever since.
Have you been back? Other than visit, did you ever move back? That's just been permanent since you got here.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to go back home only for about a year during my college years because I was able to take all of my classes online.
Okay.
But majority of the time I've been here, but I very much still am very connected deep with my roots. So I go back home every year, usually for about a month to catch up and see my family.
That's great. That's great that you can do that. What do you think? What was the draw to coming to the United States?
I think for me, there's a sense of opportunity and a sense of freedom I think that this country offers. I grew up in a post-communist country. There was a big transition from even down to how people owned property. Property was owned by the government. And so growing up in that transition of Yugoslavia falling apart, and then us going through what they call a reprivatization program was, I think, very challenging for a lot of people. Listening to the language, watching the movies, obviously what we see in Hollywood is not necessarily how life works in the United States, but I definitely went through a pretty big culture shock when I first moved here. But I think overall, there is a sense of one owning it's their own kind of having agency and having freedom to self-actualize.
As someone who has transitioned to this country, made that choice, I often wondered if we appear to take what we have for granted. Does it appear that way to you?
It definitely does. I think there's so much that immigrants go through. One example for me is it took me 15 years to just obtain citizenship. And so there's a lot of trials and tribulations that I had to go through, both in college and in my career, to get to the point where I'm at. And I would say probably the one thing that people here take for granted is that sense of freedom that they have to self-actualize.
So the show is generally Western Buddhism, meditation, and community. So far, we've talked about the falling apart of Yugoslavia and also the fact that Americans probably take this all for granted. So it's a little more political start than we normally have, but that's great. You got into Kansas City or came to Kansas City because that's where you're adopted family. What do you think of Kansas City?
I think because I've traveled so much, I consider cities to have what I call collective consciousness. And the collective consciousness of this city and the experience that I've had is one of a very strong sense of community, kindness, grace, giving grace to people. Even if you think of simple things like being on the road and people giving you the right of way. I've had so many people who have visited me since I've lived here from Europe that are so surprised by the acts of kindness that they've experienced in their life. There is a sense of not just grace, but compassion that we have for each other. And it is one of the main reasons why I've stayed here for so long.
Right. Do you feel like a local? Do you feel like this is a fit? Obviously you do. You've been here for a long time. What's that like?
I think the challenge sometimes with the United States in general is because we live in such kind of separate lives, creating our support systems can be sometimes very challenging. I think the idea for Americans is that, or in my experience, I should say, has been that it's challenging to create friendships, but once you build those friendships, they're kind of last for life. And I think the sense of us in just by geographical region, how, we all live in our own little boxes, being able to have a sense of community and create our support systems takes a lot more energy than if I lived in Europe. And that is simply, for me, it's a very simple answer of we don't live as close to each other. So it takes a lot more attention and a lot more time in order to create our support systems and have that sense of community.
It's a very unique point of view that you bring to the city and to the podcast too, for that matter. Kansas City does have a reputation, I think, of being friendly, of being open as much as a Midwestern city can be. Again, that Midwestern piece, I don't know if the Midwestern piece has any bearing on Kansas City or if it's because there are a group of cities in this region that kind of build that Midwestern, I'm going to call it charm, for lack of any other term that works. But I was just curious if that's what you had seen, because we tend to read what we've written about ourselves, believe it to be true. So I'm glad that that's been your experience. So let's make this a little more difficult for you. What's important to you?
I think where I'm at in my life right now, what I've realized in my sense of values is the relationships that I've built in my life are probably what are most important to me currently in my life. I think there was a long period of my life where I focused very much on building my career. And now I'm at a point where I want to focus more on the relationships that I'm building in my life.
So are you a practitioner of meditation?
I stumbled onto Buddhism by an accident. I have what I call a very type A 0 to 100 personality.
Okay.
And so a week before everything shut down during COVID, here at Temple Buddhist Center, Victor, we have, as you probably know, at Temple, we have about quarterly day-long silent retreats.
Yeah.
And I was very randomly browsing on Facebook and I found this event, Facebook event that said a day-long meditation retreat. I had never meditated a minute in my life prior to that. And so I decided to sign up. I live very close here to where Temple is. And I came in and did not know what to expect, obviously. And I can tell you, it was probably one of the hardest things I've done in my life. And I was a cross-country runner in high school and I've trained and ran a full marathon.
Right.
And I can tell you this was a lot more difficult than that.
Well, I can see that with being a self-professed type A personality. It's very difficult. I'm sure when you looked at it, it was like, yeah, that's perfect. That's it's right in. I could certainly do that, but then you get there and it's like, okay, I'll sit there.
Yeah.
Continue to sit there.
Yeah.
Victor and at TBC do a great job with very easy to follow instruction. That's what meditation is. If it's not easy to follow, you're probably not doing it correctly. But that had to be such a challenge to just find the patience to sit there.
I think for me, I went through the range of emotions during the day. There were moments where I was smiling. There were moments where I was crying. There were moments where I was confused. I think what I appreciated about the program that day was there was so much incredible support given by the facilitators, wasn't just Victor, to check in with me and to see how I was feeling and what I was processing. And there was a lot of disclaimers in the beginning. Creating that safe container for me, I think, is what allowed me to open up and really what became so attractive to me when it comes to Buddhism in the beginning, because I genuinely did not see that event as intro to Buddhism, so to speak. It was very much, this is a meditation event. But from that moment and having that experience that day, it really kind of ignited a spark of there is something here.
Right.
Growing up, like I said before, in a post-communist country, I did not grow up with religion. And then when I lived in the United States, I had an experience of living with 4 different host families. And
Okay.
every single one of them were Christian, but they were different denominations of Christianity.
Right.
So my first exposure to religion in general was, by moving here.
Right.
And I don't necessarily consider Buddhism a religion, but there's definitely a philosophy and a mindset and a way of living in Buddhism that just became very attractive to me to explore
Right.
once I went through that meditation event.
Right. I came from the other end of that whole story. It's a very proud type B personality. I started with 10 breaths, I think was the first time I ever practiced. And I started because I felt like there was something that I wanted from life that I wasn't getting, and I had no idea what that was. And also meditation had popped up on my radar, and it was something I could do that didn't cost anything. And so again, from where I was, it was a very pragmatic decision. But like you, it was never a goal or a plan to become a Buddhist. I practiced for years and years and years. And because TBC had some meditation programs, I became aware, kind of part of that. Community is probably too strong a word for what I was doing, but it doesn't really matter. My point is that it's funny how meditation and having a practice can kind of lead you to Buddhism. And also, since it is a practice and not really a religion, anything spiritual or sacred about it, you have to bring.
Exactly.
That we're not doling it out. We're not claiming to have answers or anything. And it's funny how once that happens, you get a group together and there's so much authenticity in the room that you start to feel some love for what's going on and how it's processing and becoming what it is. So I think that's really interesting, though, that from a type A side, you just showed up one day and went, okay, 8 hours, let's do that. So what's meditation done for you or changed in your life? How's life different since right before COVID?
Yeah, I think for me, I went through very much a spiritual awakening in 2018 after my divorce. I felt very lost and confused. I had a sense of, I don't know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I also felt a sense of, I don't have spiritual practice and a spiritual life.
Yeah.
And I was trying to find, what does that connection look like for me? And it very simply, my job at the time was very demanding. And I found myself doing weekend short trips to just be out in nature. And I started tent camping at the state parks that we have here in Missouri. And so I found myself something about nature to be very grounding. And yet I still didn't feel like I had a container or a context in which I can kind of do this practice.
Right.
And so I think what meditation did for me personally, especially around that 2019 and 2020 journey, is I very much struggled with finding a sense of acceptance of myself.
Yeah.
And other people around me.
Yeah. Those go hand in hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think a sense of grace and compassion for myself and acceptance for myself.
Right.
I think through the practice of meditation and contemplation, I've been able to identify areas in which what we call in Buddhism causes and conditions are causing suffering for me.
Yeah.
And sitting in those moments, being able to identify those things and then also trying to find ways of how can I manage what I call my neuroses in my life. So I would say the number one thing would be acceptance, because I think most of my life I went through struggles of bargaining with myself. Maybe if I do this,
Yeah.
I won't experience the suffering. Maybe if I do that. And I think that what Victor calls the wedge of awareness that came for me in moments when I was meditating is just being able to come to a sense of acceptance of who I am.
Yeah.
And so I'm not judging myself. I'm not berating myself. I think there was a lot of, honestly, self-worth and self-esteem issues that I had to work through. And meditation was the pathway for examining all of those things.
Right. Right. Yeah. Having that space, it's life-changing. At least it was for me. Having a practice where not only are you developing that space, but also you're developing a way to function in that space. Whatever pops up, I'm going to accept. I'm going to give it the space. I'm going to notice it. Not going to dwell on it, but I am going to accept it. Make sure it understands whatever that thing is, that it's welcome here. It's part of who I am. But I'm not going to ignore it. I'm not going to push it away. I'm not going to fight with it. I'm going to accept it. And it's funny how once that happens, those challenges, those memories, the emotions that are tied to them start to fade away. And somehow through all that process, you also become free to be yourself. And it's weird after you've done all of that and you're left really with just that true nature. Then all of a sudden you realize that you are a loving, caring, worthwhile, talented individual, whatever those terms mean to you, And so that practice, and of course, it takes patience because it's not quick. Especially when you look at, when you spend all your life basically being raised to be anything but the authentic self that you are. And it's not that anybody was out to get you per se. Most people don't know. It's not the way you raise children. Your task is to get the child to develop and grow and survive. It's got some things it picks up along the way that, we'll try to help with that, but that's not really our challenge. So are you still practicing now? Do you practice daily or what's that look like?
Yeah, I think for the longest time, again, that type A personality would kick in. I need to do 20 minutes and then 30 minutes and then 40 minutes. And I finally realized that I need to get down to basics. And so my daily practice now is literally 10 minutes,
Okay.
whether it's guided or unguided meditation. I kind of go with how I'm feeling in the morning. And it's usually in the morning right after I wake up.
Yeah.
And then 30 minutes of journaling.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, a bunch of members of our silent community went through a book called The Artist Way. And so there is a practice in that book. The Artist Way, just to give context, is a book around how do we kind of tackle all our insecurities in order to have a more creative life.
Okay.
And to spark our creativity. And so the idea of the morning pages is everything that you have in your mind to literally freestyle, freeform, without any judgment, without any agenda, to write it out in the morning so that you get those thoughts out on paper,
Right.
so that you can become more present in your life during the day. So these days, very simple practice, 10 minutes of meditation and getting all of those thoughts out on paper.
Right. That's a great approach. I don't know that I've met anybody that does it on a daily. I can see some real value to that process and working it that way. I am a believer if you're carrying something around that if you feel like you're kind of stuck with it, that it's good to take the time to write it out or to speak it if that's where your comfort level is. Whatever, sing it. I don't care. But like you said, to get it out, and it is freeing. It's also, it feels good to the heart to be doing something, to be moving forward, even if it's just putting it on paper. And also it gives whatever it is that's bothering you, it puts it in a size. You know what I mean? All of a sudden you can kind of see around the whole thing. And all those things are steps that you can take to, it doesn't heal or change anything immediately, but it does immediately start the process of healing or changing, whatever that is. And that's obviously, I don't know if it's obvious or not, but it feels like I'm speaking from a negative experience, but it's the same with an idea or anything, get it out there. And I think that's what, as human beings, we're supposed to do with ideas. Not all of them, a lot of 99.9% come and go, just like clouds. There are some, whether they hurt, whether they might help, whatever they feel like, they're the ones you want to get out and see.
Yeah. And oftentimes I'm a poetry writer. So oftentimes it's, as I'm meditating, yes, my mind might be clear, but right after that, and this happens to me when I'm running too, some creative idea will come up for me.
Yep.
And so being able to write that off, again, more of a positive sense too, not always, things that we're trying to slough and clear out of our systems. It's really creating an intentional container and creating an intentional time to be able to have that.
Right.
It's just very nourishing to myself. I'm curious, what is your meditation practice these days?
I am a morning guy, and right now it's generally 30 of sitting meditation. Sometimes I'll do a second 30 minutes if I have time. That's usually a weekend thing. I'm traveling a lot, so we travel. It makes it more of a challenge, and I don't miss very many days. I might miss 2 or 3 days a year. And even then, I'll usually circle back. And it's not so much that it's an addictive responds. I don't know that I feel that much better or worse, but it's just who I am, you know? And like you, sometimes things come up. I try to be guarded if something negative keeps popping up. I try to at least limit it so I don't want to spend 30 minutes dwelling on something, especially if it's out of my control or ego driven, whatever. But I have noticed that when something more positive or something moves me, I try to limit it as well, but it keeps coming around and it seems to pick up speed and momentum. And I love that about the space or about the practice, because usually if that's going on, it's telling me that there's something there that I want to further explore.
Yeah.
That's something I need to get done. That's something I need to share. This podcast is a lot like that. And when you have that kind of moment or that epiphany or whatever you would call it, especially with our song in particular, the people to support it and help you through that become available. And I think that just speaks to the love and the authenticity of the people that practice. I know it's true for the group that we know, but I also believe it's true for any songer or any practitioner. Probably, it doesn't matter if you're Buddhist or not. What it matters is, are you authentic? Have you put in the time and the work to be the true version of yourself? Are you aware enough and accepting enough to help other people, including yourself? So it's 30 minutes a day, and it's, like I said, I'm pretty set. I just sit. Some days it's a slog, but most days it's just time for me.
Yes.
So it's been great. It's been a real uplifting. It's changed my life. So
it sounds to me like that practice has been cultivated for you with intention.
Yeah.
Of being able to explore what happens for you and have. To me, it sounds like you have much of a growth mindset, like I do. So having that space intentionally to explore, like, what are those causes and conditions for me, and where's my areas of growth, and then focusing on that. It sounds like a beautiful journey.
I appreciate you saying that, because it's just been, and I don't know for sure. I don't go around and ask people, hey, am I different than I was? But I know my relationships with loved ones, the general public, work, people I will never met, don't know at all. I feel like that all feels better and more pure and more true. And I feel like I could show up and there's a lot less fear. Do you find that to be true too? Is there less fear in your life because you practice?
Yeah. And I think it only came from that self-acceptance
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
Right. So if I am accepting of myself when I show up authentically with other people, that fear of rejection, really,
Right.
that fear of abandonment, that's been the one thing that I've worked the most on in
Right.
my kind of meditation journey / healing journey. It is just such absolute freedom.
Right.
To show up as
Right.
your authentic self without those fears and insecurities. And it absolutely has transformed my relationships significantly in my life.
I think that's why I started, was that I had some fear and I couldn't figure out why. I mean, I know fear is natural. We're especially brought up to believe that. And it's what practice and what Western Buddhism has taught me, is that it's okay to be afraid of something when something happens, or to be concerned, but you don't have to carry on fear forever. You don't have to be, you don't have to live fearfully. And if you feel that, because for me, I couldn't label it. I couldn't tell what it was. I was just afraid. And I think, to your point, it was self-esteem issues. It was unable to accept myself. So, so why would anybody else?
Yeah.
A limited amount of capacity to love myself. But yeah, so, you don't realize it. It's not that at least I didn't. I wasn't trying to go to, I don't love myself. No, I don't love myself. It was just this, and I don't even think that was true. It was just the perception I was carrying.
Yeah.
So because of practice, I started to realize that, if you become this authentic version of yourself, that's the best version you can ever be. And that's the version you want to be when you show up, whether it's a good moment or a bad moment, whatever that means. They're all just moments. But if something terrible has happened, that's the bravest version. That's the most loving version. And it's possible to become more of that, but you just have to practice. Just constantly peeling that onion to try to get to that core, that Buddha nature.
Yeah.
So, and I just use the term Buddha nature. You don't have to be a Buddhist, but you can still have that in your practice. By the way, I don't think Buddha ever wanted anybody everybody to be a Buddhist. He was just trying to point out that, hey, this is how you get there. This is how you have a happier, healthier life with less fear, less judgment, more love for everyone, starting with yourself. So yeah, it's been a great tool. I always like to point out that if I can do it, anybody can do it. Again, that's
So
my
true.
type B shining through. So would you identify as a Western Buddhist after all this? Is that fair?
I think what I try to do, especially when I meet new people, is I try to kind of give them a version of Buddhism because oftentimes, and I think Victor puts it the best, right? You have this idea of Eastern philosophy with Western psychology. I think, yes, I do identify as a Western Buddhist, but I think I like to preface or explain like what does Western Buddhism mean, to people. The attraction to me initially was, and years later, I actually learned an interesting fact that because I started in traditional therapy before I got introduced to Buddhism, I didn't realize that the core tenets of Buddhism are actually used in cognitive behavioral therapy. And so that blend, again, is really what became attractive to me. It wasn't just Eastern philosophy or principles that I think as Western practitioners, it would be hard for us to connect to, but because there's so much cultural context and history behind it. And again, the other attractive thing about our Temple Buddhist Center is, we do have people like Kyle, who I did take the basics of Buddhism class to actually understand. We literally went through that pilgrimage of what the Buddha went through in the class. And so being able to understand the historical, cultural context and tying it in with, kind of these Western, let's call them therapeutic principles, to be clear, to be kind of short and clear. Yes, I think I would consider myself a Western Buddhist as we define it here at Temple.
Right. And it's pretty murky. It's a tough one. I mean, I'm being facetious to some extent, but that's one of the things that really draws me to it. There's not a lot of rules. There's no book. There's no hierarchy, And so because of that, again, we're back to that. If you want those things, you have to bring them. You're the center of this practice, of your practice. And we're all here for you, and we all want you to grow and be exactly what you are, because that's who we need. That's where the Buddha nature is. But I just love that there's no levels, there's no way to skip this. You have to be sincere. You have to put in some time. But it's such a great journey to make that it doesn't feel like work.
Exactly.
It feels great to become who you are, or start that trip towards becoming closer to who you are. So, yeah, it's a pretty amazing piece. Did you go through, when you started to meditate, did you ever feel that want for that urge to share that with others?
I did, but I also, because again, went through my experience living with my host families, for lack of a better word, Christianity being kind of shoved down my throat.
Sure.
I understood how much people, or I, rebelled at that time against that notion of someone imposing something on me.
Right.
I think it only came out when I would have experiences with people in my life naturally, because they would notice that I'm calmer or I seem happier. So it was very much if someone had an inquiry into, hey, something is different about you. What is that about?
What's your deal?
Yeah,
Lulu?
I think that's where I would kind of bring it up.
Yeah.
And, even from that perspective, I think, as we were talking about like what is attractive about Western Buddhism, it was very much the way that I would phrase it to people. It's really, again, at the core of it, the Buddha was like, I just was once human that sat under a tree and tried to figure out what are the causes and conditions that are causing suffering for me. I'm not telling you even to sit under a tree, right? I'm telling you, like, meditate, contemplate in some form, and figure out whether that works for you. And if it doesn't, go do something else, right? But there's a freedom in that.
Right. So we're getting ready to wrap this up. Is there any lessons or books or anything you'd want to recommend or share with our audience before we're done?
Yeah, there's probably one of the first books that I read about Buddhism was experiencing, or I'm totally paraphrasing here, the Buddha Within. And I think it really just points out to, I think there's so much unknown about Buddhism. And so I probably, it's not even books. I would really just, what I would offer to people is, and again, coming as someone who is very much a type A personality,
Right.
I think I would just offer for people the practice of to just, very similar to how your journey was, to start with 5 to 10 breaths and to start very simple and see how that feels in your body. I could tell you for me personally, there was very much a disconnect, what I call between my body and my head. So
Right.
I was very much a heavy, constantly thinking person. So many people, I think, have a misconception about what meditation is, which is like, I need to stop my thoughts.
Right.
And so if there's probably one piece of advice that I would give to people is to really take away that pressure of trying to fight with your mind, of like, I need to shut my thoughts, and really more about, I'm very much a visual person. So for me, the way that started for me is, here I am sitting on a mountaintop and there are clouds of thoughts that are passing by. And all I'm doing is kind of observing them and seeing where they come from, where they're going, how they're passing. And can I have more clarity and more spaciousness in my life? Can I see the sky?
Excellent.
And so I just want people to be able to get to a point where they don't feel like they're fighting with their mind.
Right.
It's really more about, how can I examine these things?
Right.
That's the one piece of advice I would offer.
That's excellent. And I think it's also a good illustration or elimination of that self-acceptance that we were talking about. So thank you so much, Lulu, for being on. It's been great. Appreciate your wisdom. I also want to thank our listeners for joining us. You can find On the Range every Friday on Spotify, as well as Amazon and our YouTube channel. Also, you can find us on the Temple Buddhist Center website. If you are so moved, you can follow us. If you have questions or comments, you can reach us at omontherange.podcast@gmail.com. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we will be back next week. Signing off and wishing you happy trails. Thanks to our On the Range production team for making this program possible, and to Mr. Brad Athey for composing and performing the original music. And to you, our listeners, thank you for being a part of this journey as we explore meditation, Western Buddhism, and the path towards a happier, healthier life. Remember, less suffering and more joy are available to everyone. It just takes practice. Until next time, stay grounded, stay kind, and keep finding peace in the simple, practical things. For all of us here at On the Range, happy trails.